Hi everyone! Today we're talking about the relationship between ENFP and ESTJ, and this is a video in my series where I'm breaking down the romantic relationships between different MBTI types. I've done a few videos before, so feel free to check them out, and today we're going to look at the positive aspects of this relationship between ENFP and ESTJ, as well as the challenges that could occur. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. All right, so I think the ENFP ESTJ dynamic is actually quite an interesting one because there's a lot of potential for mutual understanding despite the original differences. If you've watched some of my previous videos on cognitive functions as well, you've probably heard me saying that I am a supporter of the idea that the more cognitive functions people share, the easier it is for them to kind of get along in a more natural way. And because ENFP and ESTJ, they both have the same functions in the first four, just in a different order, this actually is a very good terrain for understanding the way they think, understanding the way they make decisions, understanding the way that they relate to certain things, and ultimately also communicating with each other. However, when one thinks about these two types, the vibe difference is quite large. And I think a lot of people would initially reject the idea that these two types are actually quite compatible from a cognitive function perspective, because the stereotypes for these two types are kind of extreme in the MBTI community, and people have a tendency to see them in such a light that it seems that they won't really be getting along. But if we look a little bit behind that, and really analyze the way that these two types process information, there's so much to explore. And I've actually seen so many ENFPs who get fascinated with ESTJs because their child TE really aspires to that hero TE that they see in ESTJs. And also the child NE in ESTJ aspires to the hero or dominant NE in the ENFP. So actually there can be this mirroring in this couple where they see some aspects in the other person that are there within themselves but are not as developed, they're not as strong. And there might be a semi-conscious, semi-unconscious fascination, mutual fascination. And of course, this is a great place for inspiration. It's a great place to learn from each other and help each other strengthen those child function, inferior function aspect. And at the same time, it can also be great for complementarity. So a lot of ENFPs complain that, they would like to be more organized, or they would like to follow through more with their ideas, or they would like to kind of stick to a certain train of thought or a certain way of doing things and kind of being more efficient in the way that they go about their days, which of course a lot of ESTJs can be wonderful at. And so when the ENFP partners with someone like that, it can be a great addition to their life because they get someone to kind of help them be more structured, be more efficient, be more focused on what needs to get done. At the same time, the ESTJ can really thrive when they allow themselves to be around the person like an ENFP who can enable them to be more exploratory in their approach, to bring more joy into their lives and not always focus on their responsibilities and what needs to happen and what needs to get done. Because the more idealistic, inspiring, enthusiastic nature of the ENFP can allow the ESTJ to relax a little bit more, take more time for themselves, explore their interests, their passions, connect with their values a little bit more. So in this way, this complementarity can create a really good team. And can support a long-term relationship here. But of course, the same thing that can be inspiring and interesting and create a good team dynamic can also be a great trigger point, especially if the people are not aware of what's going on, especially if their emotions get the best of them, especially if maybe the level of maturity is not so high. Because an ENFP could easily get triggered by the TE-SI dynamic in the ESTJ and feel like they can't really do what they want, that maybe the other person is trying to control them and they would want to resist the control that comes from the other person. They might also feel that their freedom is kind of being limited by the more structured, organized approach that an ESTJ would often bring to their lives. And so they might kind of either try to pull back and avoid engaging too deeply with an ESTJ, or they might get really angry and annoyed, and conflicts could arise from this. Similarly, an ESTJ could get triggered by the ENFP's more exploratory nature and lack of follow-through, and they might get really frustrated and be like, well, you're not accomplishing any of the things that we said we will accomplish. You're not responsible enough with the things that we have to do around the house, or whatever it might be. And the ESTJ might feel like they have to carry all of these more practical responsibilities of the day-to-day life, which again could either create conflict or it could cause the ESTJ to lose interest. However, like I said a little bit earlier, this is a wonderful opportunity for both of these people to look at, why am I triggered? Why is this such a problem? What are some of the emotions that come up? And look a little bit more internally. Look a little bit more at shadows, trigger points, insecurities that the other person mirrors back, and work on them, either individually or as a couple. Even if this couple doesn't necessarily resist long-term, even if the relationship doesn't resist long-term, it can still be a great avenue for both people to enhance the child and the inferior function, to see themselves more clearly and round their personality a little bit more. But yeah, it's important to notice that even if the people are mature and have emotional intelligence, these triggers can still come up. Even if the relationship is generally good and the two people get along, these triggers can still come up. And so if you find yourself in such a dynamic, in such a type pairing, it can be highly relevant to connect to those conflicts, see when they appear, and then take a step back and look at what is actually going on. What is the big picture trying to tell me? Which part of me is getting triggered by the other person, and what does this tell me about my needs? Because perhaps the ENFP getting triggered by the control and the structure of the ESTJ could also be a reflection of their own need to develop that structure and control. Perhaps they feel insecure that that certain skill is not so well developed, or they don't practice it as much in their lives. And so seeing that they get so triggered and annoyed could be a great place for them to see, okay, what can I do to get better at this? How can I practice this more in my life so that other people don't kind of interfere in my space? How can I develop my own sense of authority, structure, control, so that I'm in charge of things more and I don't feel the need to have other people kind of come and interfere with that? Or how can I ground myself more too? Because perhaps the fact that the other person is so grounded is triggering me also because I feel like I am not grounded myself. And that's an insecurity of mine, and maybe I need to work on it. And then if we switch the perspective, for an ESTJ, it can be like, well, why am I triggered by the ENFP's spontaneity and creativity and joy and playfulness? Maybe the narrative I'm telling myself is that it's triggering me because I don't want to do all these responsibilities. I want the other person to also be responsible. And yes, that might be true, but maybe there's more. Maybe I get triggered because I don't allow myself to have fun so often. Maybe I get triggered because I don't allow myself to experience joy and creativity and spontaneity enough in my life. And maybe that's a great place to start. What is one hobby that I could pick up that doesn't mean that I need to be productive? It doesn't mean that I need to be structured and efficient. Maybe a hobby where I can just enjoy things and be happy and be in the moment. So from an ESTJ's perspective, this can be a great thing to also do. So you see where I'm going. This is also a type of mentality that one can apply in any relationship, because we will always be triggered by something. Some people will trigger us more than others, but it's a great place to look at those reflections. And I'm not saying that, everything is about us developing. Sometimes people can also trigger us because they're being abusive, and that's a whole different story. But when it comes to these subtle differences in communication style, in working, in approaching tasks and responsibilities, it's usually a very good indication that if I'm triggered, there's something that I might want to develop in myself further. And the other person is just shining light on the more unconscious patterns that I have or the insecurities that I have. Okay, so these are my thoughts on some of the most important aspects to take into account when it comes to the relationship between the ENFP and the ESTJ. Thanks a lot for being with me. Thanks a lot for watching this video. And also a reminder for you guys, I'm a self-awareness coach with a background in psychology and psychotherapy, and I'm accredited by the International Coaching Federation. I specialize in supporting individuals in deepening their level of self-awareness and creating a life that truly connects with who they are. So if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to check out the link in the description below. It will take you to my website and give you a bit more information on that. Thank you so much, and see you next time with another video on typology.